people are unemployed. That's going to be a whole lot in welfare checks, ladies and gentlemen. We also say it's okay to do this because individuals benefit from the security, from knowing that if this happens to them, if they're in the shoes of the people working for General Motors in Detroit, then they're going to see the same benefits which we're providing to them. We gave you this argumentation in 60 minutes of analysis about how you can have massive harms to entire communities. This was something that was only flippantly dealt with in saying, oh well, we're going to see a phoenix arising from the ashes. Let's look at why this just simply isn't the case, ladies and gentlemen. On Team England today, we want to protect jobs. We want to protect people in these jobs from the type of social problems which we outline, the problems of depression, of alcoholism, of substance abuse, the problems that were never dealt with by side proposition. We say that if companies close, this is the types of things that happen. This doesn't just mess up one generation, ladies and gentlemen. It messes up generations for decades and decades to come. That's what we see in Pennsylvania. No, thank you. That's what we see in Welsh mining villages, where the coal industry was allowed to fall. We see education suffering. We see children who've got nothing to aspire to because both their parents are depressed and don't have jobs. And so we see low achievement in school. We say this is a generational problem. Even when you do have a few lucky kids, no thank you, who come through these schools and do really well, they don't stick around in a town where there are no jobs, ladies and gentlemen. They head off to the city where they can get some employment. We say, as a result, there's simply no one in these towns who is employable. There's no incentive for businesses to come in and take up these jobs, to try and give these people a glimmer of hope. We do offer them this glimmer of hope, ladies and gentlemen. We say we don't allow these towns to become toxic. When we have these companies, when we can see a company maybe on the verge of collapse, we can A, prop up that company and ensure that the people in those jobs are protected, or B, incite and incentivise further investment into these towns before the company goes bust, before all the social problems, the endemic social problems which you've outlined set in, and the people become fundamentally unemployable, ladies and gentlemen. We say when people invest in these towns, we save millions of citizens around the world. And this is something the side proposition simply never engage with, ladies and gentlemen. At the start of his speech, Ed told you that the value of business is worth more than the last figure on a balance sheet. It's worth the livelihood of entire communities. It's worth giving a purpose to someone who would otherwise sit at home spiralling into depression. It's worth allowing the family to keep their house, having a bus to take the children to school, and allowing a grandmother to get in touch with their family. It's worth hundreds of thousands of jobs around the world. It's worth too much to let go of the fight. Thank you.
Especially since a lot of those places need to really go to keep them going and just have them find new ways to do it. We turned around, we weren't sure. I can always say yes to
Each team is allowed 4 short minutes in which they can summarise the debate. And those short speeches go in reverse order. And so I now call on Edward Schwitzer to deliver the reply speech for the opposition team.
What the proposition didn't seem to understand today was that bailouts and nationalisation, they're different words for the same thing. When the government took a large number of preference shares in the Royal Bank of Scotland, some newspapers said it was nationalisation, and others said it was a bailout. But let's put that behind us. We don't really care. As long as the company was preserved by government intervention, then that is what we, on-side opposition, stand for today. And I'm going to look at this debate in terms of three main groups: the taxpayer, the effect on companies, and finally, I'm going to look at the effect on people. So let's first of all look at the taxpayer. And this is fundamentally what the first proposition wanted to talk about a lot in his speech. He talked about a great principle of the taxpayer and how they shouldn't be forced to pay for other people's mistakes. That great principle which the other two speakers of his team undermined when they told you that they wanted the taxpayer to pay for nationalisation of companies. But also a principle which we undermined when we told you in our model, which they never responded to, that we are going to punish those that are reckless. We are going to cancel shares of the shareholders, which I said in my definition. We are not going to leave the shareholders there. Again, something they never responded to. We also said it's not always their fault. We gave you the example of American Airlines. They said, oh well, they should save for a rainy day. We should regulate them. Fine, okay, maybe they should. But that is not always going to happen. And when they don't, we don't think it's their fault for these unforeseen circumstances. So let's look at the companies themselves. And they talked a lot about moral hazard right at the beginning of their case, something which they later didn't want to talk about so much when we gave the example of Bearings and how that was allowed to fail, and yet other companies later still acted in somewhat of a reckless manner. And they never responded to that example. We told you they're not incentivised to act recklessly because they're still going to lose their jobs, they're still going to have their CVs tarnished, and they're still going to find it very hard to get work elsewhere. They had all this stuff about how nationalisation was different from a bailout. And again, we point to what I said in my